support in economic development, and maybe to talk a bit about some of their experiences or some of the best practices they've seen in this space, and maybe some of those either warnings or ideas that people should consider when they're also going into this space, acknowledging some of the things that Ray mentioned during his opening as well. So maybe over to Mike Bonshor first to open things up for us.
Thanks, John. Gilakasa Namut Nuguam Ikawegalau Gayakala Muskabak Zaudinok. Good morning and I guess good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see a full participatory crowd. My name is Mike Bonshor. Thanks for the intro, John. I'm a member of the Zaudinok First Nation of Kinkum Inlet, which is a community on the west coast of British Columbia, part of the Kwakwaka'wakw tribe. And I've, I guess in my capacity today is as of the managing director of the BC First Nations Business Development Association, which is an association of development corporations from throughout BC. We've got nearly 40 development corporations in our membership. I was waiting for my dog to bark, but that's not her. We're fairly new. We started in 2020, and we've got from our membership, we've got about 80 BC First Nations directly and indirectly involved. And I'm coming to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Semiahmoo First Nation in close to White Rock, BC. I could explain a little bit, John, about the initiative that we're embarking on with through the BDA? Okay. Was introduced to John as part of Public Works through some other colleagues who I think are on this screen here, Tim Lowe and others, and we've put in place I guess a couple-year initiative to follow up on some recommendations made, and some of it stemming from papers that were written by CanDo a couple 3 years ago. And one of the recommendations through that was to promote and encourage sort of regional developments to support Indigenous procurement. And so we're looking at establishing the BDA as kind of a regional hub, providing sort of collective services to BC First Nation owned businesses. And so that initiative is going to be busy on a few different fronts. It's sort of at a high level. It's getting to better understand the federal procurement system as it is, putting together some ideas and thoughts and strategies on what the federal procurement landscape should be, and working in that direction, sharing information with First Nations here in BC, getting an understanding of our experience, capacity, and capability to take on federal procurement projects. Some of the work I think is somewhat foundational, although federal procurement that opportunity has been around for a while. I think there's some well understood challenges and barriers on both, I think, from the sort of systemic challenges that exist, as well as maybe it's capacity challenges on a few different fronts that our communities are working through. And I would agree with the opening comments made by Ray about this is a good time. I think this isn't a time of opportunity, and so I'm encouraged and pleased about the work that we have ahead of us through the First Nations Business Development Association. So I guess a particular welcome to, I see it's a large crowd here, a particular welcome to the BC First Nation representatives on the screen. I look forward to continuing to make contact and connect with you in the next time moving forward. I'll stop there, John, and
Great.
sort of the
Yeah.
background.
Great. Thank you for the background, Michael. I appreciate it. Jonathan, if you're available and can unmute yourself, it'd be great for you to introduce yourself and maybe give some of your insights on how economic development can be supported by leveraging federal procurement or working in this space.
Right. Okay. I feel like I should have studied for this exam. Hey, everyone. My name is Jonathon Mitchell. I'm a Westbank First Nation member. Coming to you live from Westbank First Nation. So really appreciate being on this panel. It's phenomenal. I feel like sometimes I feel shy in these moments. It's like, do I really belong here? So a little bit about me. So yeah, just a nice Indigenous guy from Westbank First Nation. I have two sons that are my entire life, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. My mother is also Westbank First Nation. My father is not. My mom actually just served her last term of council as well. And my father, he's into mining exploration and whatnot. I come from a long line of politicians. My grandmother, she was actually very instrumental in Westbank First Nation actually getting their self-government agreement. So a lot of discussion about treaty in the opening marks. Self-government is also another way of getting that sovereignty. So very proud of that, to be from a nation that does that. Professionally, I wear a couple different hats. The job that I do mostly, my day-to-day job is I work for MNP, Myers Norris Penny, as a senior consultant in their Indigenous services line, which allows me to serve like Indigenous people and Indigenous communities across Canada. Predominantly, I work in BC, which has been fantastic. And we solely work with Indigenous communities and Indigenous business, which has been great. I spend most of my time working with governance, helping with strategic planning, and then actually quite a bit of work in the economic development areas, especially from a community perspective when they're trying to separate business essentially from community, from politics essentially. So I do a lot of work in that space, and that includes training board of directors and onboarding board of directors. And it's been fantastic. Been with MNP for just about 2 years. And I can get into more relative stories about some of the work that I get involved with. And before that, actually, MNP headhunted me from my community. I worked for Westbank First Nation as a senior manager in the finance department, and essentially, I built their procurement office, which had become very important to the community's ability to be as progressive as they had been in the last about 10 years. So bringing procurement to the community allowed the government to make sure that there was a clear, transparent process, that there was a competitive process to do a lot of things that a lot of communities don't necessarily do. And I've kind of made it my lifelong goal now to really kind of help community come up to that level. So it was a complete blast to be able to be part of so many large scale projects, like building a youth center, a community center, complete renovation of the school and whatnot. So with that experience, actually, I ended up working with the likes of Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, and a variety of other specific organizations that really kind of push that narrative of entrepreneurship and governance. While I was at Westbank First Nation, I went on like an educational journey. One of them is I went and got my designation in supply chain management. So I have my supply chain management professional designation, which fantastic. Anyone that has a procurement background or is wanting to get into procurement, I highly recommend it. Of course, this is kind of a plug, but I highly recommend it. Supply Chain Canada is a fantastic organization, and the skills and training that they provide really helped my career. So with that, after I got my designation there, I actually became a board member of Supply Chain Canada. Most recently, I was the vice president of Supply Chain Canada, British Columbia. And really the whole focus was to just bring that narrative and that understanding of clear and transparent of process, and really identifying Indigenous communities as that next wave of the need for supply chain professionals. So was able to do that narrative. I then went and did my master's in Indigenous Business and Leadership through SFU. Again, if there's anyone that wants to add an MBA to their credentials, I highly recommend looking into that. Fantastic educational learning there, really developing that true governance model, as well as identifying the importance of Indigenous sovereignty. So after that, I was actually invited to the other hat that I wear is I was invited to be a board member for All Nations Trust Company. And actually, Tim, I saw him on here somewhere. Tim Lowe is my president of that organization, and it's great to work with him. So I'm now the vice president of All Nations Trust Company. And if you're not familiar with them, they're a financial institution, Indigenous-owned and operated, that focuses on lending funds to Indigenous business, as well as Indigenous community. So again, just really pushing that narrative of helping entrepreneurship. So I've kind of made it my whole life goal now, with my education and experience, to really just push that narrative of assisting communities and Indigenous business, to really kind of build that up. You know, that's the whole purpose of my career journey now. And it's interesting, some of the knowledge that you get along the way, and it's sad to say, like less than 5% of businesses in Canada, less than 5% are Indigenous owned. And that's an issue. And so I think the question that I was asked that I didn't really completely study for was something along the line of economic development in the community, and potentially the importance of getting into contracts. And hopefully I'm not rambling too much. I could probably talk for an hour and a half here, but the reality is that entrepreneurship, Indigenous entrepreneurship, is a clear sign of success of a community. They're one and the same, very much like you can look at statistics of education. If a community has education, they're predominantly going to be a little bit more successful, especially in economic development. So there's a lot of importance there, and there's a lot of things to take note of from a community perspective. And this is really important, if a community wants to get into economic development, it's imperative that they separate politics from business. So if there's anyone out there, please make sure that all communities have that economic development arm. That is the purpose of creating jobs for the community, but as well as creating funds or own source revenue. It needs to be at that arm's length. Otherwise, it just gets too messy. So if an organization or if a community wants to get involved in that, it's important to make sure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. And economic development and getting into public procurement from a community perspective is interesting because you can ramp up really quickly, and that's important. But the fact is, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through. And from like an Indigenous business perspective, it's really important to get that licensing. It's important to make sure that your insurances are up to date. Public procurement is not necessarily easy, but it's the good news is that there's a lot of good people out there that want to help. And so if it seems overwhelming, or if you're having problems or you're confused, reach out. I mean, there's a ton of people here that you can reach out to, even myself. And I'm going to make sure that I throw LinkedIn link on the chat here. So if you ever have questions about that or what to do, feel free to reach out. There's tons of people that want to help, and it's important. And I want you to know that there's actually aspects that are completely beneficial, because there is legislation on public procurement of allowable percentages that require Indigenous business to be part of. So, sorry, now my dog's here.
It's all right. It's a great moment for segueing, and I think
So I appreciate. I could ramble on forever. I'll pass it on, but
no problem. No problem, Jonathan.
I'm so proud to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you very much. And I think Paul has his speaker now set up for his youth summit and a number of significant events that Can-Do will be working on coming up. So Jonathan, thank you for that. You've provided a lot of content. Before I circle back to Mike, I was wondering if George was able to get on. And if possible, George, we'd love to have you introduce yourself and maybe just give us a couple of quick comments or ideas around how communities can use procurement to focus on economic development. And then we're going to cycle back to Mike for some other comments.
Good morning. Thank you, John. That was a good introduction, Jonathan. I'm glad to meet you and seen Tim. Anyway, my name is George Casimir. I'm a member of the Kamloops-Secwepemc First Nation. My father's from the Okanagan First Nation, and my grandfather is actually from the Goodfish. So, you know, a little bit of everything, Cree and Okanagan and Secwepemc. But I'm glad to be here. I'm coming here, you know, as an Aboriginal financial institution. I've been a manager here for Community Futures for just about 5 years now. But as well, I also know Tim Lowe. I used to be a director for All Nations Trust Company, which is also an AFI or an ACC, but definitely lending institutions where we always look to how do we support our clients who want to get into procurement? How do we provide enough capital to get them to that level of the same playing field as other entrepreneurs who aren't Indigenous? So there's always those challenges. It's about, you know, matching the lending, you know, with the opportunity. And I noticed one thing for the past, I'd say since 1996 was the first my first term on council for my community, and I spent 4 terms. And when we're accessing, you know, opportunities, whether they're joint ventures or limited partnerships, you know, the real opportunities just weren't there at that time because there's a duty to consult back then. And I think about 10 years later, we all had to work together and put not only a duty to consult, but real consultation to make that process meaningful, so that we can access, you know, so whether it's mining or forestry or pipelines, we can't just have, you know, small shares of the economic opportunity. We need to be there and have the capacity and be ready to, you know, realize on those opportunities to bring funds back to our individual nations. So I've seen a lot of different areas, you know, starting with the political aspect, you know, being a former council member and serving 4 terms for my community, you know, negotiating from the political perspective. You know, I've developed a number of joint ventures in mining and forestry for communities and different organizations that, you know, I think could have had a little better success, you know, having more capacity and, as Jonathan mentioned, education on how to develop and get through some of the legalities of developing your process in accessing procurement, because we all know about the bonding and you know some of those legal structures that we have to develop. Looking at limited partnerships, you know, how were those successful? You know, I look back, you know, if I kind of knew what I know now, you know, back then, I think it sure would have helped a lot. But, you know, we're all talking about procurement, and I've just, over the years, whether it's CANDU or NACA or AFOA or the province of BC, trying to figure out how do we increase from 1% up to 7 to 10% Indigenous inclusion into procurement. And I think that's a big question for all of us. And I'm so glad there's so many people here today, because myself as a lender, I need to take this information not only to the bureaucrats and politicians that I meet with, but I also have to provide this information to my clients. If they're just on the brink of being able to, obtain a procurement contract, how do I get them to that level? So that's my job as a lender and as a manager of a financial institution. How do we look at supporting individuals who get into procurement? I've seen, in our own communities here in the Westbank Nation, there's one individual who obtained a big procurement contract with a mining company in New Gold, and just tremendously successful. And just what comes out of that success and their support for community events and, community activities. And, it's those successful companies that we need to really strive to have them speaking at sessions like this as well. I had a good friend of mine who also had an electrical company who really made it big. These people, when they start small and when they get these procurement, you can see their success and what it does for them individually in their companies and how they're active in their communities. So I want to see more of that for Indigenous organizations and First Nation communities. One example, and once we get over that, well, do we support this initiative or not? Because there's the political and the business side of aspects, like Jonathon had mentioned. There's always that component, but having the Trans Mountain Pipeline come through and one of the First Nation communities accessing the procurement opportunities there, what they brought back to their people in terms of financial opportunity to fund education, language, culture, and all of those activities. So, we all know the importance of procurement and what it could do for us as Indigenous people. I don't know. I can talk about a lot of what I heard and a lot of these national organizations I've been involved in to add and provide their opinion, but I'm really